There's a thread running through two of the most talked about music projects right now. One starts in Latin music, one starts in soul, and somewhere in the middle, a single producer is quietly connecting them. This is not speculation for the sake of it. There are real dots here. Production credits, industry sourcing, and a pattern of artistic decision-making that points in a very specific direction. And once you see how they line up, the picture becomes very hard to ignore. So let's go through this properly, because the story has more layers than the headlines are giving it credit for. Let's start with Bad Bunny, and specifically with DTMF. If you want to understand why this producer connection matters, you first have to understand what kind of record DTMF actually is, because it is not a typical Bad Bunny track, and that distinction is important. Bad Bunny has built one of the most remarkable catalogs in contemporary music. He has broken streaming records, headlined Coachella, sold out stadiums globally, and done all of it without compromising the specificity of where he comes from. His music is rooted in Puerto Rico, in its sounds, its language, its emotional texture, and yet it has traveled everywhere. That is extraordinarily difficult to pull off. Before we get into it, welcome to Celebrity Talk Show Room. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We cover the stories that go deeper than the headlines. Now, let's get into it. Most artists who achieve that kind of global scale do it by smoothing out their edges. Bad Bunny went the other direction. He sharpened his. DTMF fits inside that tradition, but it also moves differently within it. The production has a restraint to it that creates space, and in that space, you feel everything. The textures are precise. The atmosphere is controlled. Nothing is wasted. That is not an accident of inspiration. That is craft, applied at a very high level by someone who understood exactly what the song needed to become. That kind of production does not come from a session player filling in a template. It comes from a collaborator. Someone who listened long enough and closely enough to understand what Bad Bunny was actually trying to say, and then built the architecture around it to make sure the message landed. That is who we're talking about when we talk about this producer, and that is why what comes next matters. Now here's the connection. According to sources close to the project, the producer behind DTMF is also attached to Jimin's upcoming album, Arirang, specifically to a track that multiple insiders are identifying as the likely title track, Swim. Let that sit for a moment. We are not talking about a genre crossover between artists, though those make headlines too. We are talking about a producer who has earned creative trust inside Bad Bunny's world, one of the most carefully guarded creative environments in global music, and is now reportedly at the center of what may be the most significant solo release of Jimin's career. That kind of positioning does not happen by accident. You do not end up in both of those rooms on the strength of one good record. You end up there because people who are very serious about their music have decided independently that you are the person they want building the sound around their most important work. That is the story here. Not just the connection itself, but what the connection says about the level of trust this producer has earned. To understand why Arirang carries the weight it does, you need to understand what that word actually means. Arirang is not a brand name. It is not a made-up title selected for how it sounds. It is one of the most recognized and historically significant folk songs in all of Korean history, sung for over 5 centuries, passed down across generations, and in 2012 registered by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. The song exists in dozens of regional variations across the Korean peninsula. Each version is slightly different melodies, different verses, adapted by different communities over hundreds of years. But they all carry the same emotional core: longing, separation, the pain of distance, and the resilience it takes to keep moving despite that pain. Arirang is the sound of people who have survived things. It is woven into Korean cultural identity in a way that goes far beyond any single recording or performance. This is the title Jimin chose for his album. That is not a casual decision. That is an artist making a very deliberate statement about the weight of what he is putting inside this project. When you reach for a title that carries that much history, that much cultural gravity, you are telling everyone paying attention that what follows is going to try to earn it. You are setting a standard for yourself before a single note has been heard. That kind of artistic seriousness is either reckless or it is backed by something real. Given what Jimin has demonstrated across his career, the evidence points firmly towards the latter. And his track record demands to be taken seriously. When Face came out in 2023, it did something that debut solo albums from group members rarely do. It reframed the conversation entirely. It was not an album that existed in the shadow of BTS. It stood on its own. It had a sonic identity, an emotional through line, and a willingness to sit with discomfort that a lot of artists would have flinched away from. Critics noticed, the numbers reflected it. But more importantly, the people who follow music closely noticed that something different was happening here. Muse continued that trajectory, more ambitious, more sonically adventurous, more willing to ask difficult questions without rushing towards comfortable answers. The progression from Face to Muse is the kind of artistic development that takes real courage, because it would have been very easy and very lucrative to simply replicate what worked the first time. Jimin did not do that. He pushed. Arirang, by all indications, is pushing further still. The reporting around this project consistently describes it as his most personal work, more direct, more emotionally exposed, less filtered through the language of what fans expect or what the industry can easily categorize. That is a significant creative leap for any artist. For an artist returning from military service, stepping back into a solo career after a period of enforced absence, it suggests someone who used that time to get very clear about exactly what they want to say.
So what does swim tell us if it is in fact the title track? The word is doing real work before a single second of music has been heard. Swimming is a specific kind of physical experience. It is not walking or running, activities that happen on stable ground. Swimming is movement through an element that resists you by nature. Every stroke requires you to push against something. The moment you stop moving, you begin to sink. And yet, there is also something about it that is meditative, almost hypnotic, a rhythm that takes over once you find it, a feeling of suspension that nothing else quite replicates. As a metaphor for what it means to carry enormous pressure and still keep moving, it is remarkably precise. Jimin has spoken in various interviews over the years about the weight of expectation from the industry, from fans, from himself. The standard he holds himself to, professionally and personally, is exceptionally high. The experience of living inside that, of continuing to move forward under that kind of constant pressure, is exactly what the word swim captures. And as a title track for an album called Arirang, an album named after a song that is fundamentally about persisting through hardship, the thematic alignment is striking. If swim is the center of this project, it is not there by coincidence. It is there because someone made a very deliberate choice about what this album is going to be about at its core. The production question then becomes, who do you trust to build the sound around a theme that specific and that personal? And according to sources, the answer is a producer who already proved they could do exactly that for an entirely different artist in an entirely different world. Let's talk about what that crossover actually means for music right now. 20 years ago, the global music industry operated on a clear hierarchy. English language pop was at the top. Everything else was categorized as world music, a label that was, in practice, a way of marking things as interesting but peripheral. The idea that a Korean group or a Puerto Rican rapper might become the defining global music stories of their generation would have sounded at the time like wishful thinking. What happened instead was one of the most significant structural shifts in music industry history. K-pop built its own international infrastructure, dedicated fan communities, streaming strategies, direct-to-fan communication models, and broke through not by assimilating into the existing model, but by building a parallel one. BTS were the most visible expression of that breakthrough, but the infrastructure they helped build has sustained an entire generation of artists after them. Reggaeton and Latin trap did something similar, on a different continent and through a different set of mechanisms. Bad Bunny's ascent is not just a personal success story, it is the culmination of decades of Latin music building toward a moment of genuine global recognition on its own terms, in its own language, without translation or compromise. These are two of the most consequential movements in contemporary music, and a producer who has earned trusted collaborator status inside both of them is not just talented, they represent something about where the creative center of gravity in this industry is actually located right now, which is not in one genre, one language, or one geography. It is wherever the best work is being made. The silence around Arirang deserves its own analysis. In the current music landscape, controlling information is genuinely difficult. Sessions get discussed, credits get spotted in publishing databases, collaborators talk to other collaborators. The machinery of anticipation, social media, fan communities, music forums, is always running, always pulling at threads. For a project of this profile to remain as tightly held as Arirang has been is unusual. The rollout has been disciplined. The people involved are not giving things away. And in an environment where leaks are the norm rather than the exception, that kind of sustained operational silence tends to mean one of a small number of things. Sometimes it means an artist is protecting something fragile, a project that is not quite finished, or that they are not yet sure about. Sometimes it means a label is controlling the rollout for commercial reasons. And sometimes it means everyone involved knows exactly what they have and has made a collective decision that it deserves to arrive on its own terms before it is picked apart when it is ready. Given Jimin's demonstrated approach to his craft, the deliberateness of each creative decision, the consistency with which he has pushed his own work forward, the first two explanations feel insufficient. The third one fits. Here is the bigger picture that all of this points toward. The old model of production, where certain producers belonged in certain genres, certain sounds were the property of certain cultures, and collaboration meant artists from adjacent worlds occasionally crossing paths, is functionally over. What has replaced it is something more fluid, more talent-driven, and more genuinely global than anything the industry has operated with before. A producer moving between Bad Bunny and Jimin is not an anomaly in this model. They are an example of what the model makes possible when it is working correctly. The question is not whether this kind of crossover can happen, it is already happening. The question is whether the music that comes out of it is worth the reach. And the answer, in this case, appears to be that everyone involved believes it is. Jimin returning from military service, choosing to name his most personal album after one of the most historically weighted titles in Korean culture, surrounding himself with collaborators who have proven themselves at the highest level of global music, building toward what sources are describing as the defining creative statement of his solo career. That is not someone easing back in carefully. That is someone who has been thinking about exactly what they want to say for a very long time, and now is ready to say it. Here is what we can say with confidence. Bad Bunny's DTMF is a precision-built record with a production fingerprint that is specific and identifiable. Jimin's Arirang is an album whose title alone signals a level of artistic seriousness that demands to be taken at face value. A producer who has confirmed involvement in one is reportedly at the center of the other, and the track believed to connect them, Swim, carries thematic weight that fits everything surrounding this project with uncommon precision. That is not coincidence layered on coincidence, that is a pattern. And in music, when a pattern like this assembles itself around a project this carefully constructed, it tends to resolve into something that the industry talks about for a long time afterward. Arirang is coming.
The people building it have done this before, at the highest level in more than one world. The silence around it is deliberate. The ambition behind it is documented. Watch how it lands.